The night air clung with the weight of July's humidity as 18-year-old Lauren Astley finished her shift at her part-time job. The faint glow of her phone illuminated a brief exchange, a message, a decision to stop by the home of someone she had once trusted. She wasn't afraid. Why would she be? The streets of Wayland were too quiet, her life too full of promise for danger to feel real. But that evening, amid the echo of her car door closing and the stillness of a small-town night, something was set in motion, an irreversible ripple that would shatter the lives of everyone who knew her. By dawn, a discovery no one was prepared for would reveal the unthinkable. Welcome to True Crime Theatre HQ. For more stories that explore the depths of human choices and the consequences that follow, subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. Lauren Astley was the kind of person who lit up a room simply by stepping into it. Born on April 1, 1993, in Boston, Massachusetts, she grew up in the small, picturesque town of Wayland, just a short drive from the city. Though her parents, Mary and Malcolm, divorced when she was young, Lauren was brought up in a home filled with love and unwavering support. The separation didn't shake the foundation of her family's bond. Instead, it solidified the role of two parents who adored her and gave her the best of both their worlds. At the same time, from an early age, Lauren displayed a zest for life that was as infectious as it was inspiring. She wasn't content to merely watch the world go by. She wanted to take part in shaping it. Whether it was performing as the lead in her local theater's production of Annie or hitting the high notes as a cherished member of her high school's prestigious a cappella group, the Muses, Lauren exuded a natural talent that was impossible to ignore. She was a performer through and through, her stage presence so captivating that even a stranger in the back row would leave the room feeling like they knew her. Singing wasn't simply a pastime for Lauren, it was an extension of her radiant spirit, a way of projecting her joy and passion into the hearts of others. But Lauren's ambitions weren't confined to the spotlight. Offstage, she poured her energy into helping those around her. Few could forget how, at just 12 years old, she traveled to New Orleans to assist in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Here was a young girl, barely on the cusp of adolescence, channeling her sense of empathy into meaningful action. Armed with her compassion and a determination well beyond her years, she left her comfort zone and stepped into an environment layered with hardship, determined to make even the smallest difference. It was just who she was, someone who cared, deeply and unconditionally, about the well-being of others. Lauren thrived in her community and found countless ways to give back. She balanced her life between academia, music, and a seemingly endless list of extracurriculars. She played tennis with the same determination she applied to everything else in her life. She sang in her church choir, extending the tenderness of her voice to the spiritual connection she shared with her loved ones. She also tirelessly participated in her school's symphony orchestra, adding yet another expression of creativity to her growing achievements. And as her summers rolled around, Lauren was a camp counselor, mentoring younger kids and leaving an impression that many would carry with them long after she was gone. Despite being petite, barely 5 feet tall, Lauren was anything but small in character. To those who knew her, she was small but mighty, a phrase that captured her sheer force of will and energy. She wasn't the type to sit back or shy away from taking the lead, and her determination to live life to the fullest made her magnetic. Lauren had dreams, often big ones that she was beginning to piece together for the years ahead. Her laugh could fill a room, her presence could soothe a heart, and her ambition was only just beginning to take shape. For those who knew her best, Lauren's greatest gift was her ability to care so authentically. Whether it was for her closest friends, her cousins, her neighbors, or people she barely knew, Lauren went out of her way to lift others up. She'd ask how your day was, and really mean it. She'd notice when someone was left out and make sure they felt welcome. People felt seen and loved in her presence, because that love wasn't performative. It came naturally to her. Lauren's warmth wasn't just something you admired. It wrapped around you like a favorite blanket, leaving you better for having been in her orbit. Daili was a very precise woman. Her time at Wayland High School was much like her life, full of vibrance and richness. She wasn't just a stellar student, but a quintessential high schooler, with the mix of excitement and uncertainty that comes with those formative years. Gone were the days of simple childhood joys. This was a time when everything felt important, emotional, monumental. For Lauren, those years were filled with laughter, friendship, achievements, and glimpses into the endless possibilities of her future. And though her life may have been short, its depth was undeniable. Every memory of her is steeped in the vivid colors of her passion, the brightness of her spirit, and the unwavering love she gave to the people who were lucky to know her. Lauren wasn't just 18 years old when her life was stolen. She was 18 years great. With every note she sang, every moment she volunteered, and every connection she forged, she etched her presence into the hearts of those who knew her. She was so much more than her title in any tragic headline. She was a friend, a daughter, a leader, and a dreamer. A promise of what could have been, wrapped in the kind-hearted reality of what already was. Lauren Astley was remarkable, not because of any one thing she did, but because of the way she lived, unapologetically, passionately, and with open arms to the world. And yet, in the blink of an eye, all that was taken away. Every smile, song, and unspoken dream erased in a moment. Nathaniel Fujita was the kind of young man people noticed instantly. At Wayland High School, his charm and confidence seemed to make him untouchable. Standing tall on the football field, Nathan embodied the image of the classic high school athlete. Talented, well-liked, the kind of guy who seemed to have it all figured out. Under Friday night lights, you could hear the chants of his name from the stands, the crowd's energy echoing his undeniable allure. Teachers praised his potential, classmates admired his popularity, and to many students, Nathan was the kind of person they aspired to be or be near. For a time, Lauren Astley was near. Her bubbly, outgoing energy seemed to complement Nathan's cool, collected charisma perfectly. It didn't surprise anyone when they started dating in high school. Lauren, the vibrant singer and performer, and Nathan, the celebrated athlete, it felt like a script pulled straight from a heartwarming movie. Friends described them as a golden couple, their relationship shining on the surface. Pictures of dances and dates painted a portrait of young love, the kind that makes you believe anything is possible when you're 17. But, as many know, even the brightest picture can cast shadows. Beneath their smiles and snapshots, the reality of Lauren and Nathan's relationship was far more complicated. Their romance, while passionate, wasn't without turbulence. Over the years, their relationship developed a pattern that those close to them began to notice. A cycle of intense connection, followed by heated arguments, breakups, and reconciliation. Each time they got back together, it seemed like they were testing the limits of how much they could give to and take from one another. Friends chalked it up to the highs and lows of teenage relationships, and Lauren appeared to take it in stride as best she could. On and off became the defining rhythm of their bond, but Lauren was beginning to feel the weight of its inconsistencies. If she was wrong, she desperately wanted to believe. And if she was right, she was desperately driven to the conclusion that sometimes the wait was well worth the coffee. By the time senior year was drawing to a close, Lauren had begun to envision life beyond high school. The excitement of a fresh start, college, independence, meeting new people, filled her with hope. She had plans, dreams, aspirations. But as her future began to take shape, one part of her life didn't seem to fit anymore. Her relationship with Nathan, what had once felt thrilling, now felt constraining. Her smile felt constraining. Smile got worse and worse. Lauren began to realize that while she had grown, their relationship hadn't grown with her. On her 18th birthday, a day meant to celebrate the beginning of adulthood and all its possibilities, Lauren made a decision meant to close one chapter and open a new one. She broke up with Nathan for what she intended to be the final time. This wasn't like all the times before. It wasn't a temporary fallout or a fleeting standstill. She was sure of this decision, ready to set boundaries and move on for good. It was a brave step, one that reflected her maturity and resolve to create the future she wanted. And endings rarely come without resistance, and Nathan seemed incapable of reconciling with hers. Where Lauren saw freedom and new beginnings, Nathan saw rejection and loss. He may have said he understood, even accepted her choice, but beneath the surface, his emotions churned with a tension that few noticed. There were no outbursts, no grand declarations. Instead, there was silence, a silence that crept steadily into Nathan's demeanor, deeper and darker with each passing day. Though Lauren felt a sense of relief after the breakup, hints of Nathan's struggles began to surface in subtle ways. His demeanor, once so bold, began to dim. Friends noticed he spent more time alone, retreating into himself. Nathan wasn't just heartbroken. He was unraveling in a way that no one, not even Lauren, could fully grasp. And yet, for all his quiet struggle, no one could have predicted how far his emotions would take him, or the devastating consequences of his inability to simply let go. The story of Lauren and Nathan was supposed to end with a breakup, a moment of closure, a clean break for two young people heading in separate directions. But the end of their high school relationship wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning of something much more tragic and unforgiving. Nathaniel Fodita was no longer the Nathan people once knew. The vibrant energy he carried as Wayland High's beloved football star had all but evaporated. Those who had cheered his name from the stands now barely saw him. Friends who were used to his constant jokes and easy smile started to notice his absence from their group chats and hangouts. Nathan seemed to fade into the background of life after Lauren broke up with him. But his silence wasn't just grief or heartbreak. It was isolation, a disquieting descent into his own thoughts, where he could fixate on only one thing. It began subtly, with things that could have easily been brushed off as the actions of an ex-boyfriend trying to cope with rejection. He called her once, then again, and again. Sometimes the calls came late at night. Lauren would roll her eyes at the buzzing of her phone, silencing it but rarely picking up. She probably thought it was just a phase. After all, they'd broken up countless times before, and Nathan always seemed to find his way past it. This felt no different. Or so it seemed to everyone around her. But it wasn't just the calls. Nathan started showing up in places he hadn't before. He arrived at a party one evening, walking in like nothing was wrong, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on her. Lauren was focused on enjoying her night, laughing with her friends, just beginning to embrace the freedom and excitement that came with moving on. When Nathan approached, his presence cast a cloud over her light-hearted demeanor. She was polite but firm, telling him to leave her be, to just walk away and give her space. Witnesses remembered her shaking her head as she turned back to her friends, eager to return to the moment. Nathan stood there for a moment longer, simply staring, before eventually stepping out the door. Later, Lauren told her mum about his behavior. She mentioned how frustrated she felt with Nathan's inability to accept the breakup, calling his actions harassment, but in the same breath, assuring her mother that he was harmless. "He's not dangerous," she said. "He just needs time to get over it." This was Lauren, empathetic, patient, willing to give people chances, even when they didn't deserve them. To her, Nathan's persistence was annoying, but not alarming. She didn't see it for what it was, how it was slowly escalating from inconvenience to compulsion. And she wasn't alone in her interpretation. Her friends noticed how frequently Nathan's name came up in conversation, but no one thought to press. They heard the frustration in her voice when she talked about his texts. or the time he parked outside her work under the guise of just wanting to talk. No one thought these actions could mean something more. It wasn't just Lauren and her friends who missed the signs. It was Nathan's family too. His parents noticed how withdrawn he'd become, how the once social teenager now spent hours alone in his room. It was a stark contrast to the boy they were used to, the one who would bound through the door after football practice and tell them about his plans for the weekend. Instead, Nathan would sit in silence, staring at nothing, replaying moments with Lauren in his mind, grasping onto memories even as he watched her move on without him. To those closest to him, Nathan seemed lost, gripped by heartbreak, perhaps depression. But there were subtle shifts in his demeanor that hinted at something deeper. His fixation, his refusal to acknowledge the breakup's finality. While everyone around him viewed his behavior as the usual struggle of a teenage boy heartbroken by his first love, Nathan was descending further into an obsessive, all-consuming state of mind. This slow unraveling went unnoticed, or rather, was rationalized away. Friends and family held natural assumptions. He's young, he'll bounce back eventually, they thought. Even Lauren, at times, believed that maybe this chapter would close smoothly, just like the previous breakups had. But there was something different now, an undercurrent of desperation beneath Nathan's actions, visible only in hindsight. The warning signs were faint, easy to dismiss, and almost impossible to connect in real time. What could anyone have done? What questions should they have asked? What boundaries, if any, could someone have set that might have kept Lauren safe? These questions, unasked then, now haunt everyone touched by Lauren and Nathan's story, painting the days leading up to their tragic finale with a chilling clarity that no one wanted to see until it was too late. The night Lauren Astley disappeared began as any other warm July evening in Wayland, Massachusetts. Summer hung in the air, heavy and quiet, as she wrapped up her shift at the local clothing boutique. It had been a normal day, filled with folded shelves, friendly exchanges with customers, and the assured rhythm of her routine. Lauren, with her trademark energy and kind smile, seemed her usual self, on the cusp of something new, of stepping into the next chapter of her life. Her phone vibrated lightly as she walked to her car, her face briefly illuminated by the screen's glow. A conversation with Nathaniel Fujita. A text. From the outside, this was nothing new. Lauren knew how to handle Nathan. Their breakup, while final in her eyes, still carried the remnants of familiarity. Perhaps she felt a twinge of annoyance, but not fear. Fear wasn't something she associated with Nathan. Not then. He'd asked to meet her, and, true to her character, Lauren agreed. Maybe she thought she could help him move on, provide him some kind of closure. She had always been kind like that. Maybe too kind. She slid into the driver's seat of her car, her thoughts likely on nothing more than finishing the evening and heading home. The engine hummed to life, and Lauren drove off into the humid night, unknowingly heading toward the last moments of her young life. Hours later, panic began to ripple through those who loved her. Lauren hadn't returned home. Calls and texts went unanswered. Her friends and family worked to dismiss the gnawing sense that something was wrong, consoling themselves with plausible explanations. She was probably out with friends or decided to clear her head. But beneath their practical reassurances lay a growing unease. That unease turned into full-fledged fear with the discovery of Lauren's car. Deserted and parked near the edge of a beach, it stood eerily out of place, stark against the dark, silent backdrop of water and sand. Lauren's absence from the vehicle felt like a sudden, icy wind cutting through the thick summer air. Her father, Malcolm, was among the first to arrive after hearing of the car. He stared at his daughter's lifeless dashboard, the belongings she left behind, and felt a chill settle over him. Something was wrong. Terribly, irreparably wrong. The news spread quickly. Friends, family, and neighbors rallied together, their worry growing with each hour that passed without word from Lauren. Search efforts began almost immediately, moving through the wooded areas and winding streets of Wayland. People combed through paths they had walked 100 times before, flashlights cutting through the veil of heavy night, calling her name, hoping against hope. But hope, fragile as it was shattered with the arrival of dawn. That morning, a cyclist pedaling along a marshy area near Water Row noticed something unusual in a small inlet. At first it looked like debris, perhaps trash caught in the reeds, half submerged and motionless. But as he got closer, the awful reality came into view. He stopped, his breath hitching, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a body, a young woman's body, floating face down in the water. The scene was haunting in its stillness, a stark contrast to the life and light that Lauren had once brought to everyone who knew her. Emergency responders arrived soon after, confirming what her family had desperately hoped not to hear. The body was Lauren's. Her bright life, so full of potential, so filled with promise, had been extinguished in a moment of unimaginable violence. The water lapped gently around her, as though mocking the serenity of the setting. The delicate strands of her long brown hair swayed in the current, and the morning sunlight shouldered its way through the trees, casting cruel reflections on the surface around her. The discovery broke the hearts of those who loved her and sent shockwaves through the community. Parents hugged their children tighter, neighbors whispered in disbelief, and friends mourned the girl who was supposed to be many things: an artist, a leader, an explorer of the world, but never a victim. The police studied the grim scene with heavy professionalism, their faces hard masks hiding the torment of their own questions. Lola Nuka in Karat possessed the greatest respect and the greatest love than any victim of human. What had gone so wrong? The investigation into Lauren Astley's murder began with urgency and precision. Lauren's death was more than a loss. It was an injustice that demanded answers. The small town of Wayland, once defined by its tranquil streets and close-knit community, had become the epicenter of a tragedy that left everyone searching for meaning in the unthinkable. Police knew early on that they had to act quickly, piecing together the final hours of Lauren's life to uncover the truth. The search for answers led to Nathaniel Fujita almost immediately. His name surfaced as investigators retraced Lauren's final steps. Starting with her last known communication, the text exchange, where she agreed to meet him. When questioned, Nathan seemed cooperative at first, but his demeanor carried an odd detachment. He claimed they had met that evening, describing their interaction as a brief, awkward conversation. According to him, they spoke for about 5 minutes before Lauren drove away, leaving him to his thoughts. His story, though simple, raised eyebrows. Given their tumultuous history, how could such a short, uneventful meeting be the extent of their interaction? Investigators couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan held back more than he revealed. His explorations represented a chance to delve deeper into the meeting's roots. Still, they dug deeper. The seemingly innocent details of Nathan's story began to fray when watched too closely. His timeline didn't entirely make sense. The places he claimed to have been didn't align with witness accounts or even basic logic. While Nathan painted himself as a heartbroken but harmless ex, cracks in his alibi began to show. The first breakthrough came when detectives obtained a warrant to search Nathan's home. What they found there transformed suspicion into a grim certainty. Lauren's blood was discovered in his garage, a chilling, irrefutable piece of evidence that shattered the calm Nathan had maintained. A pair of sneakers in the garage also caught investigators' attention. Despite attempts to clean them, traces of blood remained, accompanied by dirt that matched the muddy marshland where Lauren's body had been found. The narrative Nathan weaved during questioning unraveled strand by strand. Forensic evidence painted a timeline more detailed than any confession Nathan could have offered. The presence of Lauren's blood, the evidence of a struggle, the damning location of the crime, all pointed directly to him. Each discovery stripped another layer off the facade of who Nathan once appeared to be. For the community, the question evolved into something darker. This wasn't just about piecing together what had happened. It was about understanding why. How could a young man, celebrated for his talent and charm, betray every opportunity, every gift he'd been given? Why would he throw away not only his own life, but take Lauren's bright future in such a brutal, final way? She gave him her hand for a moment, seeing what was coming to her. Investigators were haunted by these questions, as was the community grappling with the toxic reality beneath Nathan's outwardly perfect image. His spiral into obsession, and the series of choices he made on that fateful night, revealed a depth of anger and possessiveness that no one had fully seen before. Those who had known him, the friends who cheered his successes, the teachers who praised his abilities, had to reconcile the Nathan they thought they knew with the one capable of such violence. The swift police work, combined with forensic evidence and Nathan's unraveling story, ultimately left no doubt about his guilt. But while the courtroom would provide justice, it could never answer the deeper, more haunting question that lingered for everyone who heard the story. How does someone handle rejection so poorly, so destructively, that they are willing to destroy not only their own future, but also the life of someone they once claimed to love? The trial of Nathaniel Fujita was one that captivated and anguished everyone who followed it. Over several tense weeks in a crowded courtroom, the proceedings explored the unbearable loss of Lauren Astley and dissected the shocking actions of the young man accused of taking her life. It was more than a trial, it was a reckoning, a search for truth in a case that had torn apart lives and left a community grasping for answers. The prosecution presented their case with firm conviction, painting Nathaniel as a young man consumed by his own darkness. They described a blueprint of premeditation, a plan fueled by months of jealousy and growing frustration. Nathan was portrayed as someone who couldn't imagine a world where Lauren existed without him, and when she finally closed the door on their relationship, it was said, something inside him snapped. Prosecutors walked the jury step by step through the evidence. The calculated nature of the crime came to life as they explained blood evidence in Nathan's garage, the effort to clean his sneakers, and the careful disposal of Lauren's body in the marshes. Acts that pointed not to moments of blind rage, but to cold control. The courtroom shifted to silence as the prosecution outlined Lauren's final night in vivid, heartbreaking detail. They described how Nathan lured her into a meeting, using the lingering tendrils of trust left from their long relationship. Putting their exchanges under a microscope, they argued that Nathan's real intention that night was never closure, but revenge. An act of ultimate control over a situation he felt slipping away. Each piece of evidence, from his actions to the tools within his reach, painted a picture of intent. They told the jury he had meant that night to be Lauren's last. But the defense told a very different story, one that sought to humanize Nathan, even as it begged for understanding of his actions. They pushed back forcefully against the accusations of premeditation, arguing instead that Nathan had never planned for that tragic night to unfold the way it did. Their version of events centered on his mental state, portraying him as a young man buckling under the weight of heartbreak and family pressures. They claimed he suffered a momentary psychotic break, a fissure in his reality, brought on by overwhelming emotions he could no longer control. Psychological insights became a battleground. The defense brought in mental health experts to explain how certain conditions, such as untreated depression and emotional instability, combined with environmental stresses, could culminate in what they called a moment of acute dissociation. One expert described how Nathan's behavior in the aftermath of the crime, the confused alibi, the attempts to clean up, was not necessarily methodical but disorganized, the result of panic-driven thinking rather than a carefully executed plan. The defense framed Nathan not as a monster, but as a broken teenager whose mind fractured under pressure, leaving him momentarily incapable of rational thought. The prosecution, however, swiftly dismantled this narrative. They challenged the defense's psychological arguments, bringing in their own experts to analyze Nathan's actions. This was not the result of a psychotic break, one prosecution psychiatrist argued. It's obsession, jealousy, control. These are not emotions of dissociation. These are emotions of knowing exactly what you're doing. This is emotions of knowing exactly what you're doing. Studies of Nathan's behavior in his months of decline revealed a consistent timeline of possessiveness, jealousy, and calculated planning that gave little credence to claims of sudden mental collapse. They pointed to his deliberate omissions and cover-ups after the crime as proof of his capacity to make logical, self-preserving choices, decisions inconsistent with the claim of temporary insanity. Decisions inconsistent with the claim of temporary insanity. The psychological profiles of Nathan on both sides were chilling to hear. Prosecutors zeroed in on his obsession, portraying him as someone who struggled to see Lauren as a separate person with her own life. He viewed her as something to be lost or won, the lead prosecutor argued in a damning statement. And when he realized she would never come back to him, he decided no one else would have her either. Meanwhile, the defense depicted him as a victim of his own psyche, a young man devoid of proper support to handle rejection and family pressures. They painted his emotional unraveling as not sinister, but pitiable, begging the jury to see his humanity, even in the face of what he had done. Testimony from those who knew both Nathan and Lauren added emotional weight to the case. Friends recounted the early days of their relationship, how Nathan seemed stronger around Lauren, and how Lauren's laughter could soften his often quiet demeanor. But they also revealed the more toxic elements. The possessiveness, the fights, the way Nathan took Lauren's independence as a personal affront. Lauren's parents bravely took the stand, their pain almost tangible, telling the court how their vibrant daughter deserved more than to have her life reduced to someone else's inability to cope with rejection. This was not her fault, her mother said, her voice cracking but strong. This was his choice, this was his decision, and it took her from us. The courtroom felt like a tightrope strung between two opposing forces. Was Nathan a young man who made an unthinkable choice in a moment of madness? Or was he someone who methodically planned to take control over Lauren's fate after losing control of their relationship? Each side tugged at the jury's emotions, methodically unraveling and reshaping the narrative of what had happened that night. Spectators sat riveted and horrified as they tried to reconcile Nathan's charm and potential with the brutality of his actions. Days turned into weeks as the case neared its conclusion. Both the prosecution and defense closed with emotional appeals, asking the jury to weigh intent against circumstance, premeditation against emotional collapse. Is justice for Lauren served by condemning a boy who momentarily lost his way? The defense pleaded. Or must we ask ourselves whether society failed two children that night? Meanwhile, the prosecution's fierce rebuttal left no room for doubt. This was no boy who lost his way. Nathan chose violence. He chose to silence Lauren because he could not stand to hear her final no. The air in the room was impossibly tense as the jury deliberated, leaving everyone to wrestle with their own questions about Nathan's intentions and motivations. When the verdict was finally read, the emotional weight of the case reached its peak, leaving no one in that courtroom unchanged by the events they had witnessed. Was there clarity in their decision, or had the story left behind an irrevocable ambiguity? That was for each listener, each life touched by Lauren's story, to decide. The aftermath of Lauren Astley's murder rippled far beyond the courtroom, leaving fractures in the lives of two families who had once been connected by happier times. Now the weight of tragedy tied them together in a way neither could have imagined nor wished for. On one side, the Astleys endured the unimaginable void created by Lauren's absence. Her light extinguished in an act of senseless violence. On the other, the Fujitas wrestled with the stark reality that their son, someone they had raised and nurtured, was capable of causing such irreversible harm. Lauren's parents, Malcolm Astley and Mary Dunn, had to summon extraordinary strength to face the loss of their only child. During the trial, they sat through painful testimony and graphic details, reliving the horror over and over. But even as their grief weighed them down, they embodied grace and resilience. Malcolm, in particular, became a figure of quiet compassion. A father determined to honor Lauren's memory, not through anger, but through empathy. It was evident in the courtroom, where he did something no one expected. After the verdict was read, Malcolm crossed the divide between opposing families and extended his arms to Nathaniel Fujita's parents. He hugged them, not as a gesture of absolution, but as an acknowledgement of the shared pain that had engulfed them all. This act, a father grieving his daughter's death reaching out to the parents of her killer, sent a wave of emotion through everyone present. It was a reminder of the humanity often obscured in such devastating cases. "There are no winners here," Malcolm later said, his words heavy with truth. What had been lost could never be regained, not for his family, nor for theirs. Mary Dunn's victim impact statement left the courtroom hushed as she spoke of the unbearable silence Lauren's absence had created. Her voice trembled as she painted a picture of Lauren's laughter filling their home, her ambitious spirit that lit up every room. But it was her most poignant realization that tore at the hearts of those listening. "She'll never call me Mummy again," Mary said, her voice breaking. That simple word, so full of love and intimacy, was now relegated to memories. It was a loss too personal, too profound to fully articulate, but it encapsulated the depth of her grief. No matter how much time passed, that void would remain. A constant ache for a future stolen from them all. For Nathan's parents, the fallout was equally shattering, though in its own unique form. They faced immense scrutiny in the community, torn between their love for their son and the horror of his actions. Their son, the star athlete, the boy with a smile that could charm a room, had committed an act they could hardly reconcile with the person they thought they knew. Witnesses said Nathan's mother wept quietly through much of the trial, holding on to the hope that some mitigating explanation would arise. But it didn't. Instead, the verdict brought finality, a confirmation of their worst fears. Their son was guilty. The Fujitas would have to live with more questions than answers. Could they have done something differently? Had they missed signs that might have changed the course of events? Those thoughts lingered, growing heavier as they tried to piece together their lives after the conviction. They found themselves isolated, not just by the community, but by their own internal turmoil, the guilt, the shame, the heartbreak of raising a child who had taken another's life. All of it pressed down on them, reshaping who they were as parents and people. Stephen said, despite the pain on both sides, there were glimmers of shared understanding. Nathan's parents reached out to the Astleys in private, expressing their deep sorrow for the loss of Lauren. It wasn't enough to bridge the yawning gap left by the tragedy, but it was a beginning. A tiny thread of shared grief, knitting together families fractured by violence. The courtroom had delivered its verdict, but it could not deliver closure. For the Astleys, life would never return to normal. Instead, they committed themselves to honoring Lauren's legacy by working to prevent similar tragedies. Malcolm became a vocal advocate, speaking about the red flags in relationships and the importance of recognizing them early. For Mary, the act of moving forward felt like carrying a piece of Lauren with her, ensuring her daughter's spirit lived on through acts of kindness and love. The struggle to understand Nathan's actions continued. They had lost their son, not in the same way, but irreversibly nonetheless, to a prison sentence, to a life defined by the unthinkable. Their family would always bear the stigma and heartbreak of that night. No matter where they turned, they would be faced with the question they could never wholly answer. How had things gone so wrong? The shared heartbreak of these two families stands as a stark reminder of the devastation wrought not just by the act itself, but by the ripple effects that follow. Though divided by their places in the story, both came away irrevocably changed, bound together by grief and the impossible task of learning to live with what had been lost. Breakup violence, a term many may not recognize, yet its impact is profoundly felt across countless lives, is a form of abuse that can occur when one partner struggles to accept the end of a relationship. It can range from stalking and harassment to more extreme and devastating acts of violence, as seen in Lauren Astley's tragic story. While domestic violence as a whole has entered the public conversation more openly over the years, breakup violence remains an underrepresented topic, one seldom discussed, yet alarmingly relevant to young adults navigating relationships. Lauren's parents, Malcolm Astley and Mary Dunn, have taken their unimaginable grief and channeled it into meaningful change. Through the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund, they have dedicated themselves to educating others about the importance of recognizing warning signs early and fostering conversations about healthy relationships. Their efforts go beyond honoring Lauren's memory. They aim to save lives. They visit schools, speak at events, and engage with communities to shed light on the red flags that often hide in plain sight. From emotional manipulation to obsessive behavior, their mission is clear. If more people learn to recognize the signs, tragedies like Lauren's might be prevented. One of Malcolm and Mary's core focuses is prevention. They emphasize the need to teach young people not just what unhealthy behaviors look like, but what healthy ones feel like. They speak about mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the value of independence in a partnership. Their message resonates deeply, especially among parents and educators who realize the critical role they play in equipping young adults with these tools. By fostering trust and communication, they hope to create an environment where young people feel safe discussing their relationships, good or bad. Lauren's parents also stress the power of education. Understanding that everyone deserves a safe and respectful relationship can empower people to identify the difference between healthy love and toxic dependence. Their hope is to build a culture where it's not taboo to speak up when something doesn't feel right, a culture where people don't wait for violence to occur before addressing unhealthy behaviors. And this is where you, the listener, come in. By keeping Lauren's story alive, you carry forward her legacy. Take a moment to reflect on the relationships in your own life. Are they built on mutual respect and understanding? When you talk to loved ones, do you encourage open dialogue about what strong partnerships look like? These small but essential conversations could make all the difference. Together we can ensure that Lauren's legacy continues to shine brightly, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to create change. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, and for committing to making a difference. Now, let's turn this conversation into action. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep spreading awareness and protecting lives.